Trump's cuts to public broadcasting hit rural Colorado hard. The recent budget cuts initiated by President Trump have left 52 local radio stations in Colorado grappling with significant financial deficits. While Trump is not the first Republican president to target the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, CPB, which has been responsible for distributing federal funds to numerous local TV and radio stations since the Kennedy administration, he is the first to successfully implement such cuts. On July 18, Congress sanctioned a $9 billion rescission request that retracts $1.1 billion in CPB funding. This decision effectively removes all federal financial support for NPR and PBS, both of which Trump has labeled as politically biased, and it also adversely affects hundreds of local member stations. Tammy Graham, the executive director of KSUT in southwestern Colorado, expressed her dismay, stating, "Federal funding has enjoyed bipartisan backing for nearly 50 years because senators recognized the crucial role public TV and radio play in their rural communities. They understood its importance until now." KSUT, established by the Southern Ute Indians, is one of the pioneering tribal radio stations in the United States. It has consistently prioritized coverage of indigenous issues affecting the Southern Ute, Ute Mountain Ute, Jicarilla Apache, and a significant portion of the Navajo Nation. Graham emphasized that the station serves as a vital link for tribal nations in the area, providing not only local news but also emergency alerts. With the federal funding cuts, KSUT anticipates a staggering $330,000 shortfall, which constitutes about 20% of its total budget, as it heads into the next fiscal year starting October 1. Similarly, KDUR, a station located on the Fort Lewis College campus, is expected to lose around 20% of its operating budget, while KSJD, another station in the Durango area, faces a one-third reduction in its budget. The 20% budget cut at KSUT means they will have to re-evaluate their national news segments, including popular programs like Morning Edition and BBC broadcasts, as well as local shows such as Native Voice One, which is an hour-long call-in talk show dedicated to Indigenous topics. Although there is a possibility for tribal stations to reclaim some of the lost funds through a provision in the bill, Graham remains doubtful about the effectiveness of this measure. "It's sort of, at best, a band-aid, and at worst a backroom deal to get this bill to pass," she remarked. "Even though we're on that list, I doubt we'll ever see those funds." In May, KSUT, along with Colorado Public Radio and Aspen Public Radio, filed a lawsuit against Trump over an executive order aimed at cutting funding for NPR and CBS, claiming that the order infringes upon their free speech rights. Graham highlighted the challenges faced by underserved communities, stating, "It's especially difficult with Native Voice One because these communities often lack adequate representation. Their voices are not amplified nearly enough." The Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been a target for various Republican administrations since its inception in 1967. Concerned about a shift from informative and educational programming to content driven by advertising revenue, Congress enacted the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 to ensure funding for stations that focus on programs of significant human interest. However, just 5 years later, the network encountered its first major crisis when President Nixon vetoed continued funding, expressing dissatisfaction with a news program he deemed biased. Subsequent presidents, including Reagan and George H.W. Bush, also attempted to dismantle public broadcasting but faced political backlash. Some argue that Trump was able to push through these cuts because public media is perceived as less essential today, reducing the political risk associated with cutting its funding. However, Graham challenges this notion, stating, "The argument we hear from Republicans is that people have many ways to access information today. But in rural areas, especially in tribal communities, we often lack reliable internet or cell service. In emergencies, like wildfires or floods, people turn to their local radio stations." Tim Russo, the station manager at KGNU in Boulder, echoed this sentiment, noting that KGNU is set to lose $155,000, or 15% of its budget, for the upcoming fiscal year. The CPB funds are crucial for maintaining facilities, staff, and equipment, as well as for accessing high-quality programming. Russo pointed out the importance of local radio during climate-related disasters, stating, "We've had our share of climate-driven catastrophes, and many residents in rural areas rely on KGNU for hyperlocal coverage that larger stations cannot provide." KGNU boasts a robust volunteer network, with over 400 active volunteers, which allows the station to remain agile and community-focused. However, this also means that budget cuts will have a more pronounced impact, as they already operate on a tight budget with little room for reductions. High Plains Public Radio, which operates KCSE in Lamar and KZNK in Brewster, Kansas, is also facing significant funding losses, amounting to nearly $500,000 over 2 years, or about 15% of its budget. The cuts will hinder their ability to provide essential services across a vast area of Colorado's eastern plains. Executive Director Quinton Hope outlined plans to cut costs and utilize reserve funds to maintain operations, while also ramping up private fundraising efforts to achieve financial independence. However, the immediate future looks bleak, as the Brewster station may have to reduce its broadcasting power, limiting its reach and accessibility. The CPB funding is vital for public radio stations to serve areas that cannot sustain broadcasts through traditional funding methods, making their financial situation markedly different from that of larger metropolitan stations. Despite having a higher percentage of donors and average contributions, rural stations remain heavily reliant on public funding. Killingsworth emphasized the commitment of local residents to these services, stating, "We simply don't have the financial base to compensate for the loss of this funding in ways that urban stations might. This burden falls most heavily on rural stations." As they navigate these changes, HPPR is refocusing on its mission to enhance the educational and cultural life of the region, while adapting its strategies for the future. At KGNU, Russo has already observed a surge in community support to help bridge the gaps left by federal cuts. However, he remains concerned about the smaller, rural, and tribal stations that may struggle to survive without adequate support. Community radios are incredibly resilient, and I believe KGNU will lean into the community for support. I just hope the community reciprocates, not only for KGNU but for all community radio partners. Alabama radio station faces funding cut, smaller stations could go dark. The public radio station WLRH in Huntsville, Alabama, is facing a significant challenge due to a recent federal funding cut that could have dire consequences for smaller stations. This situation arises from a rescission bill passed by Congress, which slashes $1.1 billion from the budget of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This organization is responsible for distributing essential funds to local National Public Radio, NPR, stations and public broadcasting service, PBS, channels across the country. In a recent LinkedIn update, WLRH 89.3 FM/HD expressed concern, stating, "While this presents a challenge to WLRH and hundreds of stations nationwide, smaller and more rural stations could go dark permanently." This statement underscores the potential for severe repercussions, particularly for less financially stable stations that rely heavily on federal support. WLRH's general manager, Eric Bruckner, revealed that the station will lose $155,000 from its annual budget, which equates to a staggering 13% of its operating costs. "We're evaluating our options going forward, but have not made any decisions at this point," Bruckner noted. Additionally, Alabama Public Television, the state's PBS affiliate, is also set to lose 13% of its total annual budget, amounting to over $2.8 million. Established in 1976 by the Huntsville-Madison County Public Library, WLRH has always aimed to reflect the diverse voices, values, and culture of its community. The station has been a staple in the area, featuring beloved programs such as Microwave Dave's Talkin' the Blues, Bob Lab's Reelin' in the Years, and Invisible City with Brad Posey, which have entertained listeners for decades, some for as long as 40 years. WLRH's broadcast area extends from north of Fayetteville to Scottsboro, west to Decatur, and south to Coleman. As they prepare for the potential economic fallout from this funding cut, station leaders are bracing for what they describe as difficult decisions in the months ahead. In April, WLRH welcomed its new general manager, Eric Bruckner, who brings with him 3 decades of experience in the radio industry. Notably, all Republican lawmakers from Alabama voted in favor of the rescission bill, while the 2 Democratic representatives, Shomari Figures and Terry Sewell, opposed it. The bill is now awaiting the signature of President Trump to become law. Despite these challenges, WLRH leaders remain committed to their programming. They assert, public radio was built on community. WLRH's strength comes from its deep connection to the people of Huntsville and the Tennessee Valley, and that relationship will remain at the heart of everything we do. With the continued support of our listeners, we will navigate these challenges together and continue to be a vital part of life in North Alabama. This situation raises important questions about the future of public broadcasting in America. Will smaller stations be able to survive without federal support? What does this mean for the diversity of voices in media? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with the funding cuts, or do you believe they threaten the very fabric of community radio?